the millionaire who looked down on the poor until he became one of them. Alexander Vaughan was a man both respected and feared. As the owner of a major construction company, he had built a powerful business empire and lived a life of luxury. Expensive cars, fine dining, and a multi-million-dollar mansion, these were things he considered natural for someone of his status. But with his wealth came arrogance. He had no patience for weakness, believed that poor people were simply lazy, and treated his employees like disposable tools. To him, they weren't individuals with struggles or emotions, they were just gears in the massive machine that kept his fortune growing. "If you're struggling, you're just not working hard enough," Alexander often said, reclining in his leather chair as he gazed out over the city skyline from his penthouse office. One day, he openly humiliated an elderly worker at one of his construction sites. "How old are you, Sam?" he asked with a mocking smirk. 62, the old bricklayer replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "And you're still laying bricks? That's just pathetic. You should be thinking about retirement instead of wasting my time." Sam lowered his head but didn't say a word. Alexander just scoffed and walked away, completely unaware that fate had a cruel lesson waiting for him. Alexander Vaughan had no idea that his empire was standing on shaky ground. While he enjoyed his wealth, corruption was brewing within his company. His financial manager had been embezzling money for years, carefully covering his tracks. His employees, mistreated and underpaid, worked just enough to avoid being fired, leading to delays and rising costs. But Vaughan ignored all the warning signs. He was too busy enjoying his high-end lifestyle, attending business meetings in luxury resorts, and making risky investments, believing his success was untouchable. Then, the storm hit. One morning, Alexander arrived at his office only to find government auditors waiting for him. His financial manager had fled the country, and investigators uncovered massive fraud within his company. Mismanaged funds, unpaid debts, and legal violations piled up like a house of cards. Investors pulled out, clients cancelled projects, and within months, Vaughan Construction collapsed under the weight of lawsuits and bankruptcy claims. His mansion, his cars, his private accounts, everything was seized. He fought in court, but there was no saving his empire. Soon, Alexander found himself standing outside his once glorious office building, holding nothing but a small suitcase and the bitter realization that he had lost everything. For the first time in his life, he was completely alone. At first, Alexander tried to rely on his business contacts, but one by one, they turned their backs on him. The same people who once begged for his attention now ignored his calls. He had no family to turn to, his arrogance had pushed them away long ago. With nowhere to go, he wandered the city, his expensive suit now wrinkled and out of place among the crowded streets. Hunger gnawed at him, but he had no money, no credit cards, nothing. He finally ended up in a homeless shelter, surrounded by the very people he used to despise. The next morning, reality hit him even harder. "You want breakfast, you work," said the shelter manager, a no-nonsense woman named Linda. "No handouts here." And so, Alexander, who once ruled a multi-million-dollar company, was given a mop and told to clean the floors. His hands, once used for signing deals worth millions, were now scrubbing dirt off the bathroom tiles. He wanted to quit, to yell at them, to demand the respect he once had. But no one cared who he used to be. In this world, he was just another man down on his luck. As the days passed, Alexander began to understand the struggles of those he once looked down upon. He met people with heartbreaking stories: a former teacher who lost his job due to illness, a single mother escaping an abusive relationship, an ex-soldier suffering from PTSD. These weren't lazy people. They were fighters, survivors. And for the first time in his life, Alexander felt something foreign to him: humility. A month had passed. Alexander had grown used to a life he had never imagined for himself. He learned to stand in line for free meals, find second-hand clothes in charity centers, and take any odd job he could find. Every night, as he lay on a thin mattress in the shelter, he thought about his huge mansion, the soft bed with expensive sheets, the breakfasts prepared by his personal chef. Now, his breakfast was a reheated bowl of porridge from the shelter's kitchen, and his bed was a narrow cot in a crowded room full of strangers. He used to laugh at people like this. He thought they were lazy and weak. Now, he was one of them. But the most painful part wasn't his living conditions. The hardest part was seeing himself from the outside. He remembered how he treated his employees, how he mocked struggling workers, how he fired people without a second thought, never considering that they had families, debts, or sick children to take care of. Now, for the first time, he understood just how cruel he had been. One morning, as Alexander was mopping the shelter floor, a man approached him. He was Harry Stewart, the owner of a small auto repair shop nearby. "I hear you're not afraid of hard work," Harry said, watching Alexander clean. "I just do what I can," Alexander replied, barely looking up. "I need an extra hand at my shop. You willing to carry tools, clean up, and help out?" Alexander couldn't believe his ears. His first real job since losing everything. "Yes. Absolutely," he answered immediately. And so, his new life began. The work was hard and dirty, but Alexander never complained. He was grateful for any opportunity. He learned, not just about fixing cars, but about respecting real labor. He finally understood how exhausting manual labor could be. He finally felt the weight of living paycheck to paycheck. Months passed, and Harry saw how much Alexander had changed. "You're a hard worker," Harry told him one day. "If you want, you can stay here long term." Alexander felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. After everything he had been through, he was finally getting a second chance. But fate wasn't done with him yet. A shocking encounter was just around the corner. 6 months had passed. Alexander was still working at Harry's auto shop. He was no longer just sweeping floors and carrying tools. He had learned how to disassemble and repair engines, replace brakes, and diagnose car problems. More importantly, he had learned respect. Before, he never thought about how much effort physical labor required. He had spent his life signing contracts, setting deadlines, and demanding results. Now, he knew how much your back ached after a 12-hour shift. He knew what it was like to live paycheck to paycheck, worrying about rent and food. And for the first time in his life, he felt ashamed of the way he had treated people. But fate wasn't done testing him. One afternoon, a shiny Mercedes pulled into the shop. A well-dressed man stepped out, confident, polished, looking at everything around him with slight disgust. Alexander froze in place. It was Mark Reed, one of his former business partners. "Damn," Mark chuckled when he saw him. "Alex? Is that you?" Alexander felt a wave of shame wash over him. Just a year ago, he had been in Mark's position, wealthy, powerful, untouchable. Now, he stood before him in a grease-stained uniform, his hands blackened with oil and dirt. "Never thought I'd see Alexander Vaughn working in a garage," Mark sneered. "How low you've fallen." Harry, who had been watching from the side, stepped forward, but Alexander held up his hand. He took a deep breath and answered calmly, "Yes, I work here. And you know what? I'm not ashamed of it." Mark was stunned. A few months ago, Alexander would have exploded with rage. He would have tried to prove that he was still powerful, still important. But now? He didn't care what Mark thought anymore. "Well, good luck with that," Mark scoffed, heading back to his car. "Not that it'll help you much." As he drove away, Harry clapped Alexander on the shoulder. "You did good, kid. A year ago, you would have burned holes through him with your eyes." Alexander smirked sadly. "A year ago, I was just like him, but this wouldn't be the last time the past came knocking." Fate had one more surprise in store for him. After his encounter with Mark, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about the past. He had spent months trying to rebuild his life, but seeing his former business partner brought back everything he had lost. He had a choice: he could keep living his simple, honest life, working at the repair shop, learning and growing. Or he could chase after his old life, desperate to prove that he was still the same powerful man he once was. Fate didn't take long to test him. A few days after Mark's visit, a black Audi pulled up to the shop. An older man stepped out, his sharp eyes filled with wisdom and experience. "Good afternoon," he said. "I need my brakes fixed." Alexander took the job, worked quickly, and finished within an hour. As he handed back the keys, he noticed the man studying him closely. "You're very precise," the man noted. "I just do my job, sir," Alexander replied. The man smirked. "I know who you are. Alexander Vaughn, the former millionaire." Alexander tensed. "Relax," the man said. "I'm not a journalist or an enemy. My name is Richard Miller. I run an investment firm." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "And why are you here?" Richard gave him a knowing look. "I've been following your story. I watched you rise, I watched you fall. And now, I see that you've changed." He paused. "I have an offer for you. I'm starting a new business, and I need a partner, someone who knows both sides of life. Someone who has seen success and failure. Someone who understands money but also understands people." Alexander was stunned. For months, he had dreamed of a second chance, but he never thought it would actually come. "I don't know what to say," Alexander admitted. Richard smiled. "Say a yes. And let's build something meaningful." Alexander took a deep breath. This was his defining moment. Would he go back to chasing wealth, forgetting everything he had learned? Or would he use this opportunity to do something good? He made his decision. Alexander stared at Richard Miller, trying to process what had just happened. A year ago, he wouldn't have hesitated. he would have jumped at the opportunity to regain his wealth and power. But now, everything was different. He thought about the homeless shelter where he had slept. The people he met who had lost everything, just like him. The workers he once humiliated, only to find himself in their shoes. And he made his decision. "I'll do it," Alexander said. Then he paused and added, "on one condition." Richard raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Alexander took a deep breath. "This business needs to do more than just make money. It needs to help people. We need to give jobs to those who've lost everything. We need to support those no one else believes in." Richard studied him for a moment. Then he smiled. "You really have changed," he said. "All right. Let's do it." They shook hands. 2 years later, Alexander and Richard had built a new construction company, but this time, it was different. They treated workers with respect. They gave second chances to those struggling to find jobs. They built a company that actually cared about people. One day, as Alexander walked through a construction site, he saw a familiar face. It was Sam, the elderly bricklayer he had once mocked. Alexander approached him. "Sam, I want to apologize," he said. "Back then, I said terrible things to you. I was blind. I'm sorry." The older man looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. "I forgave you a long time ago, son," Sam said. "You're a different man now." And for the first time in years, Alexander felt at peace. The lesson: money and power can disappear in an instant, but respect lasts forever. Never judge people by their struggles, fate can turn against you at any moment. True strength comes from admitting your mistakes and choosing to change.